Now, what happens to the Crusaders, or how did the Crusaders start? And this is, in fact, one of the most important contexts to understand as to how we lost Jerusalem in the first place. Europe is plunging into full-on economic despair. So they have massive resource deficits, they have famines and plagues, they have population issues, there is much corruption with the elite class, so there's a full-on corruption of the way that wealth is distributed. So Europe is falling into all sorts of economic despair, partly because of the corruption that is present within Europe. And in suffering that famine and that drought, and the population is dwindling and resources are dwindling, and you have mass corruption and bad distribution, you needed to find a way to turn this into a religious conflict, to turn this into some sort of holy war or righteous war on the Muslim world to justify what really was an attempt to rescue Europe from its economic despair. And many historians will say the same, that the true nature of the Crusades was more economic than it was religious. So it was as much about Antioch and Edessa as it was about Jerusalem. And in fact, when you read about the Fourth Crusade, it completely removes Jerusalem from the equation, or it focuses entirely on the richest Muslim city. So it focuses on Constantinople, Istanbul today, because the idea is to gain as much treasure and to gain the most accessible port in the Muslim world possible, to where you can transfer riches back to the Crusader kingdom. And so Venice and the Italian districts wanted the ports of Asham. Other European states were focused on China and India and the Silk routes and the spices and the different ways that they could access the East and access Asia and access pathways to Africa. And they felt cut off by the Muslim world. And so Europe needs to pillage the Muslim world under a religious call in order to bring back prosperity to the failing Crusader kingdom. Everything that you see back then has a parallel today. Just read about the gas off of the coast in Gaza. There are going to be nefarious parties, malicious motives, even more malicious than the obvious malicious motives, that will push certain parties to the table. And so the drums of war are being beaten in Europe against the Muslim Ummah to pillage the Muslim world. And it is not because tensions have boiled to a point to where it's just become untenable between the two, between the Muslims and the Christians, and therefore we have to escalate this war. It's because Europe has economic woes, primarily. Secondly, the Muslim Ummah is in complete shambles. We always get in our own way. And subhanAllah, you think of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, Da'awtu Rabbi thalath. I made dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for three things. Li thalath. I made dua that Allah would protect us from famine. This ummah would not be wiped out by famine. Allah answered that. I made dua that this ummah would not be wiped out by an external enemy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guaranteed us that as an ummah we won't be wiped out by anything external. But the third one, أَلَّا يَجْعَلَ بَأْسَهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ, that there is no misfortune, or that their misfortune does not come at their own hands due to their own disunity. Allah Azza wa Jal did not give the Prophet ﷺ that, because the ummah is responsible to maintain its own unity, its own cohesion, because Allah has already given us His habl, He's given us His rope. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. That's your covenant. Hold on to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's been extended to you as an ummah. When you hold on to it together, you're guaranteed greatness. The Muslim world was completely fractured, and as a result of it being fractured, impotence. You have the Abbasid Khilafah in one place, which is becoming a complete non-player in global Muslim politics. You have Al-Fatimiyya, Dawla Al-Fatimiyya, which is heretical to a point that it does not represent at all anymore what the spirit of Islam was supposed to be. You have the Seljuks in Iraq. You have so many different places where different empires and different players are at play, and this offers an opportunity for the Crusaders to come in and to penetrate a divided, weakened Muslim world that is busy with its internal feuds and its internal disputes. Those are the two major factors that lead to making a place like Jerusalem so vulnerable. And so I'm going to give you the names of some important figures. I want you to put yourself in Europe right now. The year is 1095. We're 400 years or so after Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu enters into Jerusalem. A man by the name of Pope Urban II gives his famous speech at Clermont. And you can look this speech up, by the way. It's his most famous address. Pope Urban II stands to initiate the Crusades. And as he initiates the Crusades against the Muslim world, he describes the Muslims as the following. He describes them as a vile race, number one. Number two, accursed and alien to God. Number three, a generation wholly given to the service of demons. Number four, take arms against the barbarians, not your brothers. And so you think about like all the marks of dehumanization that precede some of the most disgusting genocides in history. Just look at the man's speech. This is the Pope speaking. So you think about the religious justification and cover that's going to be given to the Crusaders to wreak the havoc that we know on the Muslim world. They are looking at us as a vile race, accursed, foreign to God, alien, and barbarians that should be fought instead of their brothers. On top of that, we're in the service of demons. And so a satanic, pagan race. Now think about propaganda. I mean, back then, how many people in Europe had interacted with Muslims in their daily lives? Like you think about now how dehumanization becomes possible without interaction. Think about that world and the way that peoples were separate, and how when you portray a people like that, you give license to kill in an entirely different way. On top of that, he calls on robbers to become knights, meaning we will release our prisoners and our most brutal people and send them out into battle. He calls on robbers to become knights. He offers full amnesty for any crime that's been committed, so long as you go to the Muslim world and you fight against the Muslims and you serve in these crusades. He offers debt relief in response. Open spoils of war. Whatever you can collect in the battlefield, collect it. It is yours. And the last thing, the icing on the cake, full redemption of sin when you kill the pagans. And so whatever sins you have committed before will be gone when you enter into the Muslim world and when you serve in this holy war against the Muslim world. By the way, when I say it's relevant and this precedes what will happen in Jerusalem, just read the papers of Donald Rumsfeld and John Ashcroft and the Bush administration and the orders they were giving to the military before the invasion of Iraq. It was crusader language, invoking specific references from the Crusades, and that's how you portray a people, and that's how you dehumanize them and become inhumane yourself.